They emerged from the desolate plains like imposing medieval fortresses, immense stone structures crafted to evoke awe, while simultaneously isolating those within their walls. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, an ambitious vision known as the Kirkbride Plan took form, devised by psychiatrist Thomas Story Kirkbride. He theorized that architecture could have a therapeutic effect on mental illness. Light, order, and symmetry would foster clarity of mind. The United States enthusiastically adopted his vision, resulting in the construction of over 70 grand asylums, which costing millions of dollars, designed as what were termed special apparatuses for lunacy. Among these edifices, Buffalo State Hospital in New York stands out as one of the most magnificent. Designed by architect H. Richardson in 1871, it stretched over 2,000 feet with its twin copper towers, soaring to an impressive 185 feet. The locals affectionately referred to it as the Castle. Constructed with 8 million bricks and the labor of 200 stonemasons over 3 years. It became enveloped in legend. One persistent tales suggested that even its architects succumbed to madness, a claim that was ultimately untrue. Nevertheless, by 1935, this facility was overcrowded, housing 3,800 patients in a space meant for merely 600. In Massachusetts, Worcester State Hospital rebuilt after a devastating fire in 1901, embodying a promise of order and modernity. Its superintendent asserted that the new linear wards would facilitate proper classification. In reality, however, they were overcrowded. A nurse lamented in 1918, "The halls echo with screams at night. Violent wards transformed into long corridors lined with locked cells, some individuals not having seen sunlight for a decade." Then there was Danvers State Hospital, perched dramatically on Hawthorne Hill, evoking images straight out of Gothic literature. Its 13 towers were symbolic of the original American colonies, while beneath the surface, tunnels transported supplies and, unfortunately, corpses to the morgue. By 1939, Danvers housed 2,300 patients, with just one doctor for every 250 individuals. Next came Greystone Park Hospital in New Jersey. It's notable for its vast stone foundation, once recognized as the largest in America. By 1927, it had reached a staggering capacity of 7,100 occupants, 5 times over its intended limit. The author Mary Jane Ward, herself a former patient, provided a harrowing description. "We slept head to foot so tightly that you could barely walk between the beds." As these asylums evolved, they became insular cities unto themselves. By 1954, Pilgrim State Hospital in New York, and the largest in the world with 14,000 patients, operated like a factory. Days began at the unholy hour of 5:30 a.m., featuring cold baths, cramped 15-minute meal allowances, and hours of uncompensated labor. The kitchens prepared as much as 600 gallons of coffee at a time. Here, architecture dictated behavior. Long hallways, soaring ceilings, and an omnipresent atmosphere of surveillance created a regime of obedience. At Translegheny Asylum in West Virginia, designer Richard Andrews referred to it as therapeutic architecture, yet by 1938, 2,400 individuals were confined within a space originally designated for merely 250. An inspector condemned the conditions, stating they were more suited for cattle than human beings. Some institutions masked brutality beneath a veneer of beauty. Camarillo State Hospital in California, which opened in 1936, presented a sunny image with its Spanish colonial style, graceful white walls, vibrant red roofs, and inviting open courtyards. Its superintendent insisted that sunshine would heal, yet the reality was grim. Patients were often chained to benches and left in squalor for days on end. At McLean Hospital in Massachusetts, comfort was dictated by class. Wealthy patients enjoyed the luxury of private rooms, while poorer patients were relegated to overcrowded dorms. Meanwhile, Traverse City State Hospital in Michigan was dubbed a palace for the mad, but behind its ornate facade, restraint and silence were commonplace. One inmate bitterly lamented, "The beauty becomes mockery when you realize it is only a gilded cage." There were, however, some attempts at reform. St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. abandoned the fortress-like design in favor of cottage-style housing. Architect Thomas U. Walter, known for designing the dome of the U.S. Capitol, envisioned circular wards facilitating visibility and openness. Yet the persistent issues of overcrowding and underfunding remained prevalent. By the dawn of the 20th century, these sprawling institutions had devolved into prisons defined by drudgery. Rigid schedules dictated time, long corridors restricted movement, and the architecture itself controlled lives. The initial promise of recovery became a facade for confinement, leading to one of the darkest chapters in the history of medicine. Inside these walls, the atmosphere was suffused with the stench of carbolic acid and thick with an aura of dread. Between 1900 and 1950, the practice of psychiatry became increasingly experimental and often cruel. American neurologist Dr. Walter Freeman held the belief that emotional distress was the root of madness. His cure was the severing of brain connections. By 1946, he was performing lobotomies with an ice pick, inserting it through the eye socket into the brain. Traveling across the nation in his lobotomobile, Freeman conducted surgeries in hospital theaters and parking lots. Among his earliest patients was Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of a future president. The operation left her permanently impaired. Freeman executed over 3,500 lobotomies before a tragic incident in 1967 resulted in a patient's death. Before lobotomies became popular, a widely adopted practice known as moral treatment emerged, which mandated obedience and labor as therapeutic measures. Patients were compelled to work the fields, scrub floors, or sew uniforms, and reports boasted millions saved through so-called therapeutic labor. As time progressed, shock therapies were introduced. In the late 1920s, Austrian psychiatrist Manfred Sekel claimed that insulin-induced comas could cure schizophrenia, a notion that hospitals eagerly embraced. At Pilgrim State alone, as many as 2,000 patients underwent the procedure, resulting in dozens of fatalities and countless others left with irreversible brain damage. Critics voiced concerns that we are not treating diseases, we are treating human beings. Next came electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, first developed in Italy in 1938. The very first test subjects included a homeless man who pleaded, "It's not another one, it's deadly." Despite this, ECT rapidly gained popularity. Early ECT sessions were conducted without anesthesia. Patients often broke bones as their bodies convulsed. In some institutions, like Rockland State in New York, doctors shocked up to 100 patients daily, with some psychiatrists even asserting that memory loss could be beneficial. Isolation also became a prevalent form of control. Quiet rooms and padded cells filled the basements of these facilities. Danvers isolation chambers, colloquially referred to as the dungeons, restraints were widely employed, utilizing devices like the Utica crib, the tranquilizer chair, and leather muzzles that bound the hands. By the 1920s, physical restraint affected over half the patients in certain hospitals. Hydrotherapy's prolonged cold baths, encased with canvas covers, was touted as calming yet frequently used as a method of control, with patients at Buffalo State submerged for up to 8 hours daily. The search for physical explanations of mental illness fostered surgical excess. Dr. Henry Cotton in New Jersey posited that mental illness stemmed from hidden infections in teeth, tonsils, and intestines. Between 1919 and 1921, he conducted over 1,000 surgeries, resulting in a dismal 30% mortality rate. Tragically, even his own son underwent a similar procedure. Despite mounting evidence against these practices, reform remained slow. Pharmaceuticals that treated psychosis and depression were not yet available. Many physicians genuinely believed they were doing good. However, within the confines of these asylums, the line separating treatment from torture blurred dangerously. The tragic experiences of actress Frances Farmer in the 1940s brought the horrors of the system to public awareness. Her memoir, along with Mary Jane Ward's novel, The Snake Pit, and its subsequent film adaptation, forced American society to confront the grim realities hidden behind stone walls. The majority of those confined behind these walls were women. By the early 1900s, nearly 3/4 of asylum occupants were female. Their so-called illnesses were often social or moral, such as reading too much, speaking out of turn, or yearning for independence. At Pennsylvania Hospital in 1907, 40% of women were diagnosed with hysteria. Dr. Benjamin Rush is known as the father of American psychiatry. argued that women's natural sensibility made them predisposed to madness. His invention, the tranquilizer chair, restrained countless women experiencing nervous agitation. Many women were institutionalized for transgressing social norms. In 1908, Elizabeth Parker was committed by her husband simply for refusing marital duties. Another patient, Marie Adelaide Henderson, was confined for the supposed crime of reading popular novels and advocating for suffrage. One patient file documented a young engineer named Alice Mitchell who was locked away for displaying masculine tendencies, her only transgression being a desire to study engineering. Writers and activists began to voice their opposition. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, constrained from writing during her time in the rest cure, nearly lost her sanity before transforming her experiences into the groundbreaking short story, The Yellow Wallpaper. Virginia Woolf suffered under similar prescribed treatments, which included milk and marriage as remedies. Her diaries dripped with irony as she lamented, "They speak of my brain as though it were a toy they could wind up." At Nebraska State Hospital, women were 3 times more likely than men to be diagnosed as morally insane. Some, like Josephine Crawford, faced punishment for running businesses or leading suffrage meetings. Under Dr. Henry Cotton's misguided theories, thousands of women endured mutilation through unnecessary hysterectomies and dental extractions in the name of restoration. Even those doctors who were sincere in their efforts could inadvertently perpetuate cruelty. Dr. Alice Bennett's meticulous case records detail the plight of Sarah Thompson, who was institutionalized for grieving her deceased son. Thompson's letters expressed her anguish. "They held me under the cold water until I stopped crying. My tears, they say, are symptoms of madness." This narrative of oppression was not confined to America. Similar abuses unfolded across Europe. At the Salpêtrière in Paris, Dr. Jean-Martin Charcot publicly displayed hysterical women for the education of medical students. Photographic documentation of contorted bodies codified a long-standing definition of female madness. In Britain, journalist Dorothy Lawrence, who disguised herself as a soldier to report from the front lines, was institutionalized for delusions and perished in an asylum. Yet amid this overwhelming darkness, voices of reform emerged. In the 1840s, Dorothea Dix dedicated herself to exposing the deplorable conditions faced by mentally ill individuals chained in jails. Her tireless efforts resulted in the establishment of hospitals across America, intended for care rather than punishment. Clifford Beers, a former patient, published a mind that found itself in 1908, igniting the mental hygiene movement. Dr. Adolf Meyer championed a holistic approach to treatment, advocating for addressing the whole individual. Nurse Linda Richards pioneered training programs for others to treat patients with dignity and compassion. Journalist Nellie Bly risked her own mental health to infiltrate Blackwell's Island Asylum, igniting public outrage with her exposé 10 Days in a Madhouse. Dr. Anna Taylor introduced early forms of group therapy, showcasing the potential of conversation to foster healing where restraint had failed. By the middle of the century, a gradual change took hold. Restraints became less common, and the usage of hydrotherapy and lobotomies declined. What was once known as moral treatment evolved into the more humane occupational therapy. The very language surrounding mental illness transformed from terms like lunatic to patient. The architecture of asylums underwent a profound transition from the towering Gothic fortresses envisioned by Kirkbride to the more inclusive, cottage-style developments championed by reformers. Today, many of these institutions stand as poignant monuments to both cruelty and the potential for progress. They illustrate how easily scientific practices can morph into mechanisms of punishment, yet also reflect how compassion, once stirred, can begin to mend what fear built within stone walls. As psychiatrist Franco Basaglia aptly articulated, the asylum is not a fortress to conquer. It is a mistake to correct, and although some of those mistakes have been rectified, the shadows cast by those historical walls linger over modern psychiatry, serving as a stark reminder: healing must never again resemble this. To support our work and stay updated, subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon. Show your support by liking this video, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and sharing it with others to help us grow our historical community.